Good morning and welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna, episode 159, where we're looking at the MacColl collection held in our Highland Archive Centre. My name is Lorna McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres across the Highlands of Scotland, in Inverness, in Portree, in Fort William and in Wick. And together we look after the historic collections for the Highlands of Scotland. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in the Learn with Lorna series. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we really are grateful for that. And there's a link to be able to do so, whether you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube. Now, as I mentioned, this week is pre-recorded again, as I am at Milburn Academy speaking to pupils and teachers about careers in archives and using our collections. So apologies that this is pre-recorded, but hopefully you have found it okay, and hopefully you found last week's where I was speaking about the Caithness police records. And as I mentioned last week, we're going right from the northeast coast of our area, from the Caithness police records, down to the southwest part of the area that we look after in the Highlands, going to Highland Archive Centre to look at the MacColl papers. So as I mentioned, MacColl collection is held in the Highland Archive Centre in Fort William. And so this week, the person I need to thank for helping me in the research and putting together notes for me and some ideas of things that I could draw upon to talk about for this episode, I need to thank my colleague Rory, our archivist in Lochaber. So as always, Rory, thank you for all your help. The MacColl collection is large. It covers 16 linear metres and it covers the years 1811 through to 1974. It was pulled together and created by Hugh Geoffrey MacColl and details and includes correspondence and items from him, his family, his ancestors, and also documents from the Clan MacColl Society, of which Hugh was a founding member and treasurer. So it comprises papers of that specific line of the MacColl family and legal papers, correspondence and so on. And then papers of the Clan MacColl Society, Clan Colla. Things such as newspaper cuttings, membership material, genealogies of the family, financial records and so on. The collection also has some fantastic photos in it. Some brilliant photos of cheeky little children. So I'm going to work through this collection by looking at different generations of the family initially, who are represented within the family papers, and then look at the MacColl Society papers. Before I go any further though, I've just realised that I haven't explained why I've got such a different background. That's because I'm recording it in my office at work as opposed to my office at home. So you can enjoy having a look round at my different surroundings. For anyone who remembers the first Highland archivist, Bob Stewart, this little squirrel sitting behind me was something he used to take, giving talks to illustrate how an archivist gathers things in and protects them. And recently it passed to me as the keeper of the squirrel, so that's why I have a squirrel over my shoulder. So the MacColl collection starts with Hugh MacColl, who was born in 1813. Hugh MacColl's family were originally from Mull, and he lived in Glasgow where he worked as a tailor. He was a very, very religious man, heavily involved with the United Presbyterian Church, both in Mull and in Glasgow. In 1845, this Hugh MacColl, and I will continue to do that because there's several generations of the same name, as there always are, Hugh MacColl was elected as co-secretary of the Glasgow Sabbath School, and he was in the directorate of both the Wellington Street and the Pollock Shields United Presbyterian churches. So you get a feeling that besides his work as a tailor, his faith and his religion were really very formative in his life. In September 1849, Hugh MacColl married Janet Roberton, who was the daughter of James Roberton, and they married in the Gorbals in Glasgow, and we have a copy of this within the collection. And Janet Roberton was also from a very religious family. She was also immersed in the United Presbyterian Church, and her papers also include Bible verses and diaries with religious extracts, Bible extracts, and so on, written throughout her life. So again, you get this feeling of the intense importance of their faith in their individual lives and in their family life. Incidentally, Janet's sister Mary Roberton married James Christie Casey, and we also have in the collection some wonderful photos of him in wig and gown. There are letters from this generation in the collection, and you get a sense of a young couple before their wedding in 1849. You get a sense of the young couple the same as any young couple, and I always find that amazing no matter what date you look at. So, for instance, this is written by Hugh to Janet. My dearest Janet, I have for the last 10 or 15 minutes been indulging in every kind of reverie, retrospective and perspective. The truth is, I have been thinking about yourself, by no means an uncommon thing, as you may suppose, and it has occurred to me that as I could not see your face so often as I would like, there's nothing to prevent me thus to correspond with you. First, let me thank you for your letter of Monday. It is kind and affectionate and faithful, and just everything I like, and everything I would have expected from you. I highly appreciate your sympathy and desire more than ever to recognise the hand of God in late events. So, interesting there, that's a letter he was writing back to her in response to. It seems he was handling something in the church. She didn't really approve of the way he had been handling it, and he's writing as he comes round to her way of thinking. Janet, as I mentioned, was the daughter of James Roberton, and they seem to have been, again, very immersed in the church, and it was very important to them. And when her father died in November 1868, we have a lovely item in the collection where Janet writes her recollections of her father's last days. And this is what it says. He was 74 when he died in November 1868. In the beginning of October, Father had an illness which confined him for some days to bed and left him weak and frail. From this, however, he seemed to rally and looked remarkably well considering his advanced age and his feeble frame. He seemed to have no particular presentiment that his end was near, though he frequently remarked that he had reached the allotted period of man's life and could not be long with us. He had not been in church for several Sabbaths on account of his illness, and on Sabbath the 15th of November he went to St. John in a cab and thus paid a farewell visit to the place of worship where he had so often listened to the glad tidings of the gospel and been refreshed by its ordinances, and where for nearly 40 years he had been an office-bearer. In the afternoon, Mr. McEwen preached a sermon to children. Father went into the vestry to speak with Mr. Anderson, and he met Mr. McEwen and remarked to him, "That was an excellent sermon, and though I am a pretty old child, I enjoyed it very much." It's just a lovely set of recollections, I think, of his last days. Hugh MacColl and Janet Roberton had 7 children. Agnes MacColl, Mary Patterson MacColl, James Roberton MacColl, who emigrated to America, Jane Wilson MacColl, Hugh MacColl, John MacColl, who became a minister, and Alexander MacColl, who also became a minister and also emigrated to America, where he was a minister of the Second Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia in 1911. We have letters from both Hugh and Janet to various members of their family, various children. So, for instance, we have this letter written by Hugh to Agnes when she was about 6 or 7. My dear Agnes, I hope that you are getting better of the cough and enjoying yourself at Win Hill. How much there is about it to make you happy. The green fields, the pretty flowers, the deep blue sea, the lofty hills, the music of birds, all there to teach you what a kind Father God is who has provided them for you. And this is not all, for he has given you grandmamma and all the other kind friends to care for you. Do try and love all about you, but above all, try to love your Father in heaven. I hope to see you on Saturday, with kind love from your dear Papa. So again, you get a feeling of the faith being the overriding concern of the family, but also just that affection of a father writing to a young daughter. Here's another one written to Agnes by her mother, Janet, on her 18th birthday. My dear Agnes, it seems this is your birthday. I hope you will have a happy day and many, many happy returns. I'm sorry I cannot spend it with you, but I'm glad you're to have Papa and other friends this afternoon. It seems short to look back to this day 18 years ago when you were such a tiny creature, and now you are quite a little woman, and Providence has in the meantime assigned you with a sphere of responsibility and, I hope, of usefulness. Dear Agnes, I hope you can make your birthday a season of affection, that you can view the past with gratitude and with humility, and that you can commit the future to the care of your Heavenly Father. May you ever be guided by his wisdom in the formation of your friendships and in all the events and changes which may come in your life. I'm sorry I have not got a little birthday present for you, but you must just take the will for the deed. I hope you will excuse Mary this afternoon. She has gone to town and has a number of messages, but I am sure she joins me in the love and the good wishes. Hoping you will be at Pollokshields soon, remain, my dear Agnes, your affectionate Mamma. So again, as I say, you really get a sense of the family's devotion to faith, and the real driving importance that those parents have, that the children should feel that too. And those references there to, I hope that you have a sense of purpose, a sense of usefulness. I hope you have a duty and that you're doing something worthwhile with your life. I get the feeling in reading these that there's also some strong discipline alongside the love from the parents. There's one document in particular that makes me wonder that, a letter written to Janet by her 8-year-old son, John, in which, let me get the exact quote and I'll read it to you, in which John asks for forgiveness for losing sixpence. The second half of the note reads, "My dear Mamma, I do not want you to give me a sixpence for it, but I just want you to forgive. I will never do so again if I can help it. I think God has punished me for doing wrong, but still he has made me very sorry for what I have done. Do forgive me and make me again your loving son, John." A letter asking for forgiveness, it says at the bottom. John would go on to become a minister, so perhaps that lesson of forgiveness went deep. That letter was written in 1871, the year that Janet would die. And the family, as you would expect, were deeply struck by this loss and mourned her loss. And this letter, written by one of her sons to his aunt, really illustrates that, I think. "My dear aunt, I hope you're quite well. I miss Mamma very much just now, for I used to read to her so often. I think you will remember one day you were over here and she was getting better then. And when you came downstairs, you said that Mamma had been asking for me to read to her, and she was wondering what I had been doing. Now she is out of our sight, but we must all remember that we all have a cross to bear. Perhaps this may be our heaviest burden, but we should bear them all with patience. But if we go to heaven, we shall meet there, and what a happy meeting that shall be. There are a great many friends of ours passing away to the better world. Our aged, beloved minister has gone away to the eternal world, where sorrow and pain shall be no more. But we must remember that the body is only a covering for the soul, and soon it will be our time too, and we will see all our friends which we now think lost. Papa told us last Sabbath that the body and the soul are like a watch, and if you take the cover off a watch, it still ticks. And so the body is the cover, and the soul is the person who dies. Our soul goes to heaven, and our body is put into the grave. My dear aunt, write to me very soon, if you can." Again, the sense of comfort that faith is bringing to the family, and the son at that point was very young when he wrote that. In 1882, Janet's husband, Hugh MacColl, died, and this obituary was published in the Glasgow Sabbath School magazine. There are few teachers whom I have known who could converse so interestingly about those who attended his classes than Mr. MacColl. By simplicity and winsomeness, he gained their esteem and respect. They looked upon him as a true friend. Often in their griefs and anxieties, they came to him to unburden their hearts. The manner in which it was done had a most beneficial influence, not only at the time, but also resulted in great good for their future well-being. The spirit of friendliness should be more cultivated by all teachers, and especially those who have charge of senior classes. Now, Hugh and Janet's children continued, of course, to live their lives with their own highs and lows. There is a hilarious sounding letter in the collection in which Alexander MacColl, one of the sons, his new wife, describes their marriage in America in 1892. She's writing back to Alexander's sisters back in the UK, and she says, "It was quite the most original performance I ever saw or heard about. I think the funniest part was that it was so utterly different to what any of you will be picturing. Why such a thing happened to us, I do not know. It did really seem too bad." And she goes on to describe that apparently for their wedding, the temperature reached 90 degrees, perspiration ran down everybody's face, all the ice cream melted, and immediately after the ceremony, Alec was so exhausted he went and lay down until it was time for them to leave. So you get a sense of some fun in the family letters as well. But of course the times weren't all good. And another of Janet and Hugh's children went through something more traumatic. And this is a letter written a year after that wedding from another son, James, also in America, again writing back to his sisters here in the UK, recording the death of his daughter, Margaret. "My dear sisters, our dear little girl died this morning at 3:30, and although she has suffered much for 4 years, yet the end was a great shock as it came so suddenly. Yesterday was Christmas, and she was delighted at the Christmas tree, and she took dinner with us. For 3 or 4 weeks she has been frail, and I felt rather anxious about her. It seemed to me discouraging that she should relapse after so much steady improvement. I can only say that the Lord hath given and the Lord hath taken away, and blessed be the name of the Lord." And again, you get the feeling of that faith sustaining the family through everything, through highs, through lows. So there are references to different members of the family, and I've kind of touched on some of those, but we're going to focus or follow the story of one son in particular, one of Hugh and Janet's children, Hugh MacColl, of course. Hugh was born in Glasgow on the 30th of June, 1861, meaning he was only 10 years old when his mother died. In 1876, at the age of 15, he became an apprentice engineer at Robert Napier and Sons, working on the Clyde. Alongside the work that he did there as a draftsman, he also pursued further studies at Anderson's College, which is now the University of Strathclyde. And I find it really fascinating. I've spoken, I think, about this in previous episodes, where it doesn't take much time for a family's fortunes to completely change. So we're looking at Hugh and Janet there. He's a tailor. This one particular son starts to pursue further studies. And as a result of that, he worked his way up the ranks of his chosen profession. So he became a draftsman at the Central Marine Engineer Works in Hartlepool, and then at the very famous Harland and Wolff in Belfast. He then returned to Glasgow as chief draftsman with James Howden and Co. And then in 1889 was appointed technical manager of the engineering works in Portilla, of Portilla White and Co. In Seville, in Spain, where he was known as Don Hugo. In 1895, he returned back to Britain to found the Reith Quay Engineering Works in Sunderland, which would later be known as MacColl and Pollock. He had memberships of numerous institutions and engineering societies and shipbuilding institutes and so on. And he had achieved all of that prior to his marriage in 1901 to Maud McCarthy. I just find that amazing that we see that line, and I know I've referenced it repeatedly through this, but that line of faith passing down, the fact that various generations became ministers, various of the sons became ministers. But now we start to see a shift to, not at all to say that the faith didn't continue, but a shift in profession to engineering. Hugh and Maud, after they married in 1901, had 2 children, Hugh Geoffrey MacColl and James Eugene MacColl. James, born in 1908, became a barrister at the Inner Temple. In 1933, went on to become Mayor of Paddington in 1947, Labour MP for Widnes from 1950 to 1971, so a good long 21-year stretch, and Parliamentary Secretary for Housing and Local Government. So that was James, but we're going to focus on the other son, Hugh and Maud's other son, Geoffrey MacColl. And so far, and I'm very conscious of this, that we're 20 minutes in, and so far you would be excused for wondering why this collection is in Lochaber. We've talked about Glasgow, we've talked about Sunderland, we've talked about Spain even. So why is this collection in Lochaber? Well, that should become clear from now on. Hugh Geoffrey MacColl was born on the 20th of March 1902. After leaving school, he served an apprenticeship as a marine engineer while studying at Sunderland Technical College. So again, that pursuit of the practical skills of engineering alongside further studies. He would then go on to Christ College, Cambridge, which, as I say, is quite an extraordinary thing across only a generation or two. In 1927, he joined the British Aluminium Company at Warrington Rolling Mills before transferring to become the head of now metallurgical department at British Aluminium's Kinlochleven Works. He then later became the manager of the Kinlochleven and Lochaber laboratories and then chief technical officer at the Falkirk Rolling Mills, where apparently he would come backwards and forwards every weekend so that he could be immersed in Lochaber. He was drawn to Lochaber, of course, for the job, but also because this is traditionally MacColl country. And also he saw the prospect for Highland development. And in later life, in 1946, he gave a speech about this, about the role that the Highlands could play in development and what he saw as the situation of Highland industry, Highland economy, and so on. He incidentally got into some hot water for that because he thought that the state of education was not great, and that did not go down well with the education authorities. So we find ourselves in Lochaber, and this is why the collection comes here, because Hugh Geoffrey MacColl was resident here for many years, but also because the clan MacColl is associated with Argyll. So that was his work, but in his spare time, Hugh Geoffrey MacColl conducted extensive research into the history and genealogies of Clan MacColl. And when he left British Aluminium in Kinlochleven in Lochaber, his leaving present, they collected a large sum of money and they said, what would you like us to do with this sum of money? What do you want us to buy for you that you're going to use and want? And he requested to have his 25 years worth of MacColl research across 52 notebooks bound into volumes. And so that was what his leaving present was. They were bound into 24 volumes, bound in green cloth, emblazoned in gold with the MacColl crest of the MacColl Society. Isn't that a nice present? And we now have those in the collection. As I said, the MacColls had long been associated with Lochaber, in particular Appin and Loch Fyne. And through the 1920s and 30s, Hugh Geoffrey MacColl was able to satisfy an urge he had had for a while and purchase land in the area. He purchased land in Craigranach and a couple of farms in Glenmore, in Glencoe. Glenmore, that's in a totally different part of the country. Farms in Glencoe, and as well as caring and researching those areas, he was able to purchase land and spend a lot of time there. Hugh Geoffrey MacColl married Marjorie Gwilym Jones in 1935, and they had 2 children, Hugh and Eugene. Now, Hugh Geoffrey MacColl clearly valued his older family members, so those generations I've mentioned already, and he strove to maintain contact with them. And there are letters in the collection to aunties and uncles and cousins where he's talking about family matters, but also where he is talking about the wider clan call, where he's, in some of them, sharing his delight or recording his delight in being able to share MacColl country with them. And that passion for being in touch, for sharing information, for gathering information, didn't just extend to his immediate family. Have a listen to this extract taken from his obituary, which was published in the Clan MacColl Journal when on his death. It's a long extract, but I wanted to read it all to you because I think it's really insightful as to how the collection came about and why we have the collection. Hugh Geoffrey MacColl was accustomed to date his interest in MacColl genealogy from his father's funeral, which took place when he was 13 years old. It was the occasion of a considerable assembling of relations, and one calculated to prompt a boy living away in England to ask questions. It was some years before he began to appreciate the widespread ramifications of the clan. Framed in his father's billiard room was a picture titled MacColl from MacIan's Costumes of the Clans, with the misleading notes. But his immediate interest was in his own family tree, which later developed into C1. When he went to Cambridge as an undergraduate and had access to the university library, his systematic research can be said to have begun. In July 1923, the Oban Times published a letter from him in which he asked for information. About this time, he began to make personal contact with MacColls all over the world, and from the earliest stages, his investigations were as thorough in the United States and in the Dominions as in the British Isles. In September 1923, with his brother James Eugene MacColl, he paid his first visit to Appin and began the arduous work of collecting oral traditions and genealogies. In that year, his principal means of transport was bicycle. In 1926, he had been able to spend some months in Canada and the United States and strengthen and increase the contacts he had been able to make by letter, forming firm friendships with many MacColls who welcomed him into their homes and did all they could to help him with his quest. Some of these clansfolk and others from Australia and New Zealand he had the great pleasure of meeting later in Ballachulish, though he always felt that he would have liked more adequate opportunities of showing them in the practical way of hospitality how much he appreciated their outstanding kindness and encouragement and continuing friendship. At this time, the work was really a private venture of his own, though he had behind him a Clan MacColl History and Genealogy Committee, on which he had invited several well-known members of the clan to serve. In 1931, a more formal organisation came with the establishment of the Common Cloncolla. Hugh Geoffrey was among those who addressed the inaugural meeting at Ballachulish in September 1931. He became treasurer of the society, an office which he continued to hold without a break until his death. From this time, he found in his third cousin, Mrs. MacColl McCowan, our honorary secretary, an active collaborator, a staunch friend and a wise counsellor. And increasingly together, they played an energetic part in the society's activities, organising the gatherings in Appin which were so popular a feature before the war, and bringing out the journal, even during the wartime difficulties of economy and material, and even more so of time. Hugh Geoffrey was not a professional historian, but he brought a highly trained and experienced scientific mind into a field where those qualities are often lacking. He compiled records with meticulous accuracy, and he had a scientist's respect for the facts. He firmly avoided the besetting sin of some genealogists of losing completeness by paying too much attention to prominent representatives of the clan, to the exclusion of valuable links with through the less known. He would never ignore any information because it seemed trivial, or fail to confirm to the theories he had already formed. He set about patiently to collate all available written records with any bearing on the clan. His friends who knew his many other interests were often surprised that he appeared to spend half of his spare time among the death registers in Edinburgh, even in the dungeons of Borthwick Castle, where certain records were stored during the war, and the other half of his time in churchyards among the tombstones. But it was only by such laborious attention to detail that he could have compiled his unique MacColl marriage index, by which he was able to link together many different families whose members were totally aware of any relationship. And then the final section I wanted to read with you of this paragraph was, to this framework of carefully documented facts, Hugh G. painstakingly fitted in the oral traditions he was able to collect. For a man who was naturally very shy, it was always rather an ordeal to call on people to ask them intimate and sometimes embarrassing questions about their ancestors and relations. He didn't find such personal contacts easy, but he was helped partly by his own determination and partly by the rarely failing interest and the nearly universal courtesy which MacColls and most other Highlanders showed to him. Many of the stories and much of the genealogical data he collected were obtained only in the nick of time before it perished from memory. And that takes me from the family part of the collection onto the Clan MacColl part. We hold Hugh Jeffrey's many notebooks, including those bound ones he got as a leaving present from Kinlochleven, and they are full of information about members of the MacColl family. There are notes on birth records, marriage records and death records, notes on census records and church records any time that they reference a MacColl, notes on customs of the area and of the Western Isles. Then there are the official Clan MacColl Society records. There are a copy of the Constitution and rules when the society was formed in 1931. When it was formed, incidentally, we have all the copy of the rules, but I thought some of them were worth highlighting. It had an aim of fostering clan spirit and an aim of cultivating friendship, an aim of collecting history, tradition, genealogy, music, objects, anything which bared in any way on Clan MacColl, and an objective of preserving any of those, including buildings and items that might be at risk. It had an aim of encouraging education through bursaries for MacColls, and an aim of affording relief to any people bearing the name who were in need, if the funds permitted. This account of the first meeting explains why it started. The speakers explained that the idea of a MacColl society was not new, for it had been mooted for many years. Recently, however, the proposal had received impetus from the activities of MacColls in connection with a memorial to Ewan MacColl, the Bard. Also, as a result of certain correspondence in the present regarding the part played by the MacColls in carrying the Appin banner at Culloden. Sorry, this was written in the 30s and it's very, very faint. There were already branches of MacColls overseas who held reunions, but it was felt desirable to have one central society which would link up MacColl activities in all parts of the world and be the means of making MacColls realise that however widely scattered they might be, they were still united by a common bond of clanship. So that was September 1931 that the society was founded. By November 1932, there were 278 members from across the world. We can see from a list of founder members that there were also founder members from across the world, many, of course, in and around Appin and in Lochaber, but right across the UK, from Canada, from the US and elsewhere. So right from the beginning, a huge amount of interest in this society. We also hold the clan journals, huge swathes of correspondence, by which I mean hundreds of files of correspondence on different branches of the MacColl family. We have notebooks of research. They have the minutes of the Clan MacColl Society, membership papers, financial records, newspaper cuttings, card indexes about those marriages and births, and so on. If you have a MacColl family connection, please contact us. This is absolutely the Bible to researching the MacColls. If you're in the Lochaber area or in the Highlands and able to drop in, please do come and see Rory and have a look. But likewise, if you're out with elsewhere and you have a connection, please do get in touch with us. I wanted to finish this episode with an extract, a lovely quote from Hugh Jeffrey MacColl's brother James Eugene about Hugh's research. Because Hugh died in 1947, very unexpectedly. He died following a car accident. And after his death, this is something his brother wrote to Hugh's wife. Getting the history and genealogies published is probably rather a pipe dream. It's unlikely that I would live or be sufficiently composed to do very much. One simply can't start where Hugh Jeffrey, stopped 25 years ago. It would be dog in the manger to stop people using the records if they really are going to make effective use of them. For what it's worth, we could reserve some copyright in anything we pass on. You did a magnificent job in getting the records into some sort of order when you came back to Craigranach. The most useful thing would be for this collection to be used effectively. And of course, that's exactly what happened, because it ended up with us in Lochaber Archive Centre, where people have come from all over the world to look at the MacColl collection, to talk about Hugh's own family, but largely to look at that huge power of work he did in collecting information about MacColls. So nice, I thought, to finish on that quote where his brother is saying, I hope they can be made use of. They should go somewhere where they're going to be used. And that's exactly what happened. Like I say, Hugh died very unexpectedly in 1947, but his legacy lives on both in his family and also in that collection. And because of the collection, so too do the memories of the previous generations of the family live on. I hope that you found that interesting and useful. If you have, as I say, connections to the MacColls, please do get in touch with us and come and have a look at the huge range of information that there is within this collection. Thank you again to Rory in Lochaber for the power of work he did in pulling some notes together for me. I hope you can join me next week. Next week we'll be back live, hooray! Which means that I can speak to people again. We'll be looking at women's institutes in our collections. But in the meantime, a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But as I always say, if you are able to donate towards our work, then we're truly grateful for that. It does make a big difference to us. So thank you.